It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to today's debate on the passports for life. Sadly, because of the lockdowns and the other issues surrounding us around the planet, some of our very important guests could not have made it today. Thanks to technology that's very often faulty, we have a connection with Mr. Eldad Beck, who is an expert and a correspondent of the Israel Hayom, a daily newspaper. He's connecting with us from Israel. We would also like, but just to warn you, we do have some connection issues, but hopefully we will be able to hear from Mr. Beck. Could I also welcome Rooger Moorhouse, a distinguished historian, member of the British Royal Historical Association, author of numerous very successful books, and one of the examples is First to Fight, about the Poland's war in 1939, which I strongly recommend to buy. Mr. Czesław Bielecki, a publicist, politician, opposition activist in communist Poland, has managed to make it today, flew in just yesterday. Simke Steinberger, a great friend of Poland, councillor from Hackney, also an organizer of the Polish Conservatives in Hackney. Sadly, Monika Krawczyk could not have made it today, but we are hoping that Daniel Kawczyński MP, the chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on Poland, will be able to join us with a little delay because of the votes that are currently taking place in the House of Commons. Why have we got it today? It's the first event out of two very important ones promoting the group of Ładoś, the Bernese group. A group that I haven't heard about a few years ago. Not many people have heard about a few years ago. The whole concept, the whole project was done in secret. It was done in secret to such an extent that even in the 90s, the Polish state and other states hid it and did not reveal what happened during those darkest times, and how Polish diplomats, in cooperation with Jewish activists, various diplomats from Switzerland and Southern American countries, attempted the impossible to save as many Jews during the Second World War as possible by providing them with illegal passports. Without further ado, we will have a moment for a debate at the end of today's panel, and I know there are lots of topics in the Polish-Jewish relations and relations that have been enormously good throughout the hundreds of years, but there were many misunderstandings and there are some misconceptions, but without debating these issues, we will never find the transparency, the clarity, and the goodwill that we wish to have. And this is the reason why we have today's debate. Could I kindly ask Mr. Moorhouse to take the floor and in a few minutes just explain a little bit about the Ładoś list, which is an enigma to, I believe, many of us that have gathered today.
Hello, thank you, George, very much. Good to see so many of you here. Thank you for coming. As you've heard, it's a very important subject, this. It's one that I've been working on for a couple of years. George has given me the task of just explaining what the Ładoś group was and how it worked, how the operation worked and so on, why it failed as well. As you've heard, the Ładoś group operated out of the Polish embassy in Bern in Switzerland during World War II. It was an informal grouping of roughly six, mainly the main players are six, Polish diplomats and Jewish activists. There are other peripheral figures to those six, but those six are usually considered the main ones. And their task was, that they set themselves, a humanitarian mission to illegally produce Latin American passports that were then sent into mainly occupied Poland, but into other camps as well, to enable Jews to escape the Holocaust. The members of that group, let me just go through them quickly. The most notable who gave his name to the group was the ambassador. He was actually downgraded at the behest of the Germans. He was downgraded to a chargé d'affaires. His name was Aleksandra Ładosia. He was the sort of figurehead of the group. He was the one that had to go and argue for them with, among others, the Swiss foreign minister in 1943. Those that actually carried out most of the work were his deputies, Deputy Legation Head Stefan Ryniewicz and his Vice Consul Konstantin Rokicki. Incidentally, the vast majority of the surviving Ładoś passports bear Rokicki's handwriting, so he was the one that was actually filling out the passports prior to copies being sent into occupied Poland. Additional to those, you have Julia Szkul, who was an employee of the embassy initially on economic matters. He was a Polish Jew, and he provided a close link to the Jewish activists who were Abraham Silberschein, who was representative in Switzerland of the World Jewish Congress, amongst other organisations, and Chaim Eiss, who was representative of the Agudat Israel in Switzerland as well. The origins of the operation that they established between them go back actually to 1940, and there's a connection to Kaunas, an operation in Kaunas through a Japanese consul in Kaunas whose name was Kiyone Sugihara, and he was producing transit visas across the Soviet Union and entry visas into Japan, crucially. You couldn't apply for a transit visa unless you had an entry visa into Japan. He was producing that, essentially waiving all rules and restrictions to produce those in 1940. And that was really for Jews trying to escaping the Soviet Union rather than the Holocaust, because as we know, 1940, the Holocaust is not yet properly underway. So these are Polish Jews escaping into Lithuania and then wanting to escape from the Soviet annexation of Lithuania. But crucially, that connection, at the other end of that link, was Tadeusz Roma, who was then the Polish ambassador in Tokyo, and he effectively received those refugees, and he would later become foreign minister of the Polish government in exile in London. So Polish circles would have been reasonably aware of what Sugihara was doing in Kaunas. It was only a brief window in that summer of 1940 that he was doing it. So fairly soon after, similar operations had begun in a rather piecemeal manner out of Switzerland. And that grows very strongly through 1941 into 42. The main period is really 1942, I think, and into 1943. And the way it worked was that those Jewish activists would, in some cases, suggest names of prominent Jews that they wanted to get out of occupied Poland, but in many cases they had names suggested to them, or you could even apply. You could apply from abroad. Your relatives from New York or wherever they might be could apply on your behalf, and by hook or by crook, personal details were provided, photographs, and they would all be supplied back to Bern, and then they would put all that together with the paperwork from a friendly honorary consul of a Latin American country. Most of those that were used actually came from Paraguay. So they used an honorary consul from the Republic of Paraguay in Bern, whose name was Rudolf Hügli. He was paid for his trouble, so he wasn't doing it necessarily out of the goodness of his heart. He was paid quite handsomely for his trouble. He would provide these passports for Paraguay. Other countries as well were involved, Haiti, Peru, Chile and others. But the majority of them that were produced were Paraguayan. They were then copied and notarized and sent, and the copy was sent back into occupied Poland. So essentially that's how it worked. The curiosity of this is that both sides knew that this was fake. So the Jews themselves knew that these were fake. It was really a last roll of the dice. This was the last chance that they had, perhaps, to escape a deportation to Treblinka or to Auschwitz. So if you could produce paperwork that says, I'm a citizen of wherever it is, it might get you effectively a stay of execution. The Germans too knew that these were fake. they had a policy effectively of collecting foreign Jews, because this was something that for them, possibly those foreign Jews could be used for leverage with foreign governments, or they could be used to exchange for German citizens held abroad in Allied countries. So they had an interest in collecting as many foreign Jews as they could, and weren't particularly bothered whether the paperwork that those foreign Jews had was actually fraudulent or not, legal or not. So both sides knew that this was a fraudulent operation. The operation comes to something of a halt at the end of 1943-44, early 44, over the question of recognition. The Americans particularly had been rather critical of this operation. The State Department had been very punctilious about the idea of recognising forged passports. They didn't want to recognise forged passports on principle. And they pressurised the Latin American governments not to recognise them either. And this was an argument that had sort of raged through late 1943, with the honorary consuls, for example, Hugli, who did most of the Paraguayan ones, being removed from his post in September of 43. And this was an argument of recognition had raged through 1943, and Ładoś himself actually had got very closely involved and had been summoned to speak with the Swiss foreign minister and tried to persuade him to put his shoulder to the wheel and allow this recognition, or official recognition, of the Latin American passports. But this began to fail, so one by one the Latin American countries said that they wouldn't recognise those passports that had been produced, and by early 1944 the Germans realised that all of those exchange Jews, as they were called, were actually to them rather worthless, because those countries were not going to recognise them as citizens. So the vast majority that they held in a number of camps, such as Vittel and Bergen-Belsen, were deported to Auschwitz and murdered. So that was through 1944 that the programme effectively winds up. In terms of numbers, it's been estimated that the Ładoś group produced somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 Latin American passports. It's known that over 800 people are known to have survived the Holocaust on Ładoś passports, and by sort of extrapolating with the figures, it's been estimated that the total number that might have survived is in the range between 2,000 and 3,000. So we know it's just over 800, and it's possible that it's between 2,000 and 3,000 in total that survived. A last word, we heard about why this has been sort of hidden for so long. One sort of crucial reason that George didn't mention is that the vast majority of recipients of Ładoś passports never knew where they'd come from. So what was usual was that you might receive, shall we say, a copy of a Paraguayan passport. That might give you a stay of execution. You might end up in Belsen, in one of the sort of subcamps of Belsen, and that might enable you to survive. But crucially, as the recipient, you very rarely knew where that had come from. You might know somebody up the chain, but you don't know that it came ultimately from the Polish embassy in Switzerland. So that link was very often missing. So a lot of this, where the history, the historiography of the Holocaust has been written in the years since 1945, is often very dependent on first-hand testimony. That plays a very strong role in historiography and the way history is framed. And if those narratives are not there, then the Ładoś story never comes to light. So it's not necessarily, I would say, that it's been actively hidden. It was just that it was never known. It was so secretive that it was never known about in the first place. So it took archival digging to actually bring it to light. And now you're sort of, one of the tasks that I'm involved with is trying to look through memoir material and first-hand material to actually look at where people are mentioning Paraguayan passports, because we know that those have come from the Ładoś group, even if Ładoś and the rest of them are not mentioned. So that's another sort of crucial part of the story. So hopefully that fills everyone in so we know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Roger. What you mentioned at the end is crucial. I watched a video, which a few documentaries when preparing to today's debate, and in one of them, in a ceremony that was Polish president attended, there was an interview with one of the ladies that was a child of one of the people that that got the Paraguayan passport and managed to survive. And this lady questioned, she said, "All my life I knew my parents have Paraguayan passports, but I never knew why and how. And only now," and that was I think last year or 2 years ago, they found out. So yes, this is very new, and we all talk about the righteous among the nations, but this one story is not yet known to the world, and it should be. Could I now ask Mr. Bielecki, who has Jewish roots and who has been involved in various capacities in Polish politics, could you tell us a bit more about yourself maybe, and why do you think that the Polish state was not able to reveal that incredible story earlier?
I'm here a bit confused because between recent politician and historian, I feel a bit as a political animal. You may study about me, but not having a full capacity to describe the story. Nevertheless, I knew this story because some Polish part of my family was engaged in this research in Polish diplomacy in Bern, so I knew from the beginning the discovery and the kind of sensation about it. But I want to raise another question. It seems to me, answering directly, I am 100% Jew, and more than that, since '68, when I was liberated from communist jail in '68, I went to local government and I registered myself as a Jew. They asked me why not Korean. I told them because from my mother's side and my father's side I'm Jewish, and because you say that Jews are Zionists, and that's kind of cover slogan to cover your official anti-Semitism, communist anti-Semitism. So I want to be registered, so it will solve on both sides so complicated problem. And since this time I have clear message, and I feel as Polish citizen in 100% with Polish engagement, but I have no problem with, let's say, with my roots, which is cleaning up the table everywhere in all kind of activities. But I want to raise another problem. It seems to me very, very interesting within Western environment. What's legal, what's illegal? Whether that's good to be always legal and go along the bylaws and laws as German people were doing and still sometimes are doing, or sometimes it's better to be a bit Anglo-Saxon and let's say find precedences and enlarge some holes in the fences which are built around us, whether that's more practical or not. My father and mother survived under false papers, and fortunately in the 80s I had as well false identity card. We had a discussion in the Tube now how my colleagues are judging railway workers in former Poland. I estimate very much that in my Solidarity underground circle I had many railway workers. They were collecting in the tunnel under the center of Warsaw stealth IDs thrown by thieves through the windows. And I had such a ID redone, of course, with my own picture. I was a fireman in this time because they found an ID of tall guy with my gray eyes, and it was only the question of photography. We managed it. So I think first question is legal or illegal. Second question is how much some courageous individuals may start a real, very, very important enterprise. And how it's painful that that's enough to find one denunciator, or one troublemaker, or one too serious guy, too formal, to break this role, which is a human role, which is our obligation, our duty. So I think that's the second point. And I knew the question of Paraguay from the poetry of Władysław Szlenger, who died in Warsaw Ghetto because he wrote a very nice poem about how it's nice to be in the country as Paraguay or Costa Rica. It's very nice. He was a cabaret poet who, let's say, changed his own role in Polish literature during the war. He became a tragic poet. I read his collection of his poems entitled "What I Was Reading for Dying People." So I think the question is to think how much and why the West didn't help Polish Jews and didn't protest against Holocaust. And a couple of years ago, I found final argument, which is not so popular. I found it in Raymond Aron's memoir. It was his testimony. He was working in France Libre in London, here in London, in France Libre Radio. And he expressed it in a very cute way. He said, because Hitler was expressing everywhere that Jews are responsible for the war, and Jews are responsible for the conflicts, global conflicts, people in the West and allies didn't want to touch upon this issue. And I know that in some speeches, Hitler was expressing the name of President of the United States in such a word, Herr Roosevelt. Herr Roosevelt. It sounded as a Jewish name. So this kind of reassecuration, let me say, of Westerners not to touch upon this issue was one of the purpose that it wasn't a mass bombing of death camps or concentration camp or some German cities as revenge for the Holocaust process, which was on the track and it was known. So I think when we look at the efforts of Ładoś and Rokicki Group, how long and with what risk, because it was the center of intelligence services, Switzerland during the Second World War, how much they were risking just to be right people on the right place in the right time, and how much world forces and allies didn't react just before the Second World War and after. So I think that's an issue we have to raise. That's an issue which is, let's say, political environment of the heroism of this small group of people who started to do something together with Jewish community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we now connect to Israel? Mr. Eldad Beck, I hope you managed to hear us quite well. Could we ask you, what is the opinion about the Ładoś group in Israel? Is this a topic that all the press is now writing about? Are there various viewpoints on this? What do you hear in Israel about this group? Whether it is even a topic that is discussed, or is it starting? to be. And we have sadly heard very recently that Ładoś would not become a righteous among the nations, which is an important honor granted by the Israeli government for those non-Jews, Gentiles that saved Jews during the war. It did say your connection is unstable, but we do hope that we will able to hear your stable comments, sir.
Yes, good evening. I will have to disappoint you a little bit because I'm actually not in Israel, but in the south of France. I hope that the French will not cut the line between here and London. Apparently they did.
We do hear you with some minor troubles, but we do hear you.
Now, the Ładoś story in Israel is not as known as it should be. I would like, first of all, to add some details about how the whole story emerged again. It is quite important to emphasize that the story was actually known, and there were also some reports about it in the 90s as well. However, why nobody took into account this amazing story of rescuing Jews, first of all, because the members of the Polish members of the government in exile, the Polish government in exile, and they were very anti-communist. So the communist regime had absolutely no reason whatsoever to recognize their role in saving Jews. And in the 90s, when there were also some stories in the press about it, Poland was busy with many other things, getting rid of the communists and trying to become a democracy, and therefore the story was not accorded the attention that it was supposed to get. It is extremely important to emphasize also that the story emerged again about 3 years ago, thanks to the efforts of Jewish groups and individuals. Some of them were personally connected to the Ładoś group, and I stress it because there are attempts to pretend that discussing this issue of the Ładoś group is actually an effort of the Polish government to rewrite history. So what actually happened was that Jews brought up the issue in very specifically, I will speak about the Jewish Honorary Council of Poland in Zurich, Markus Lechner, who got in touch with who used to be the Polish ambassador in Switzerland at the time, Jakob Kumoch, and told him about the story. And Jakob Kumoch, being the ambassador, heard about it for the first time, and then he decided to start researching into the archives of the embassy which he was in charge of. And then slowly, the whole story started emerging out, and we really managed to put together all those who participated in discovering the story. We managed to put together all the elements of this rescuing operation. It is important to emphasize again and again that the Polish diplomats who were involved, the Polish non-Jewish diplomats who were involved in this operation, did it for no other reason but helping Jews. They didn't have any other motivations, and they didn't get any money for it. And this is extremely important because these are some of the criteria according to which you can get the title of the righteous among the nations. Moreover, it's important to take into account
If
the
I would be
the
in the
context
position of
in which this
I
rescuing operation took
this
place.
kind of
One
turning upside
thinks
down the
that
history.
Switzerland was
We have a
neutral.
name for it.
However, the Germans
We
were
call it
extremely active
presentism.
in Germany, in Switzerland, and they were actually putting
Suddenly,
huge
right-wing
pressures on
politicians saying,
the
in the
Swiss
way I
government
will be
to
in the forest, I will be
close
in the
down
forest in the
the
40s.
Polish diplomatic representation. And
understand what I
meaning that actually the Polish
I will
diplomats who
help
were
Jews.
involved
I will
in
save
this
them
falsified,
easily.
illegal activity actually took
You
a
haven't the
huge
name.
risk on themselves,
That's
and this
why
is one of the criteria. It's also one of the criteria that Debata should take into the account. Now, we have been reporting about this story. There were some reports about it in the written press in Israel, also on television. It brought Yad Vashem to recognize only the Council Rokitsky as a righteous among the nations. Unfortunately, I believe that Yad Vashem at that time didn't look at all the details as it should have been, because otherwise they would have understood that Rokitsky was not able to do what he has done illegally without getting the permission of Aleksandra Ładosia, who was his superior. Therefore, I think that the Ładosia should be title he deserves is not understandable unless you take it into a certain political level. Something else that I would like to stress, the Ładosia group was not the only diplomatic Polish representation outside of occupied Europe, which worked night and day in order to rescue Jews. We have discovered recently that there was a huge rescue operation in Turkey. The Polish consul in Istanbul falsified Christianity documents to Jews arriving to Istanbul and wanting to get to other countries who allowed only non-Jews to immigrate to them, which means that they had to declare that to show some documents that they were not Jewish in order to get to Brazil, for example, or even to get into mandatory Palestine, Eretz Israel, because the British, who were at the time in charge of mandatory Eretz Israel Palestine, did allow non-Jewish Poles to get into the land, but didn't want any Jews to get into the land in order not to make the Arabs angry. So what the Polish consul in Istanbul did, he actually Christianified Jews and allowed them this way to get into the then mandatory Eretz Israel Palestine. There were also activities of rescue in Romania, in Bulgaria. We are beginning to discover also a huge rescue operation in France, and all this, and I'll be short, shows that the exiled government of Poland was very much involved in rescuing Jews for different reasons, mainly because they considered them to be Polish citizens and not Polish Jewish citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simka, could I ask you, have you heard of the Ładosia group before? Have you heard of the stories of Poles and other nations helping Jews during the dark days of the war? And how do you personally feel when you visit Poland? Because your ancestors are from Poland.
Thank you. Before I start, I hope you can hear me. I wanted to thank all my Polish friends for bringing us here where we are today. For me, sitting here and be able to answer this question is a very emotional thing because obviously, you know, I lost my grandparents in the war, and the way I came to where I am today, for instance, George and
A bit closer to the microphone.
George and Mariusz and Philip have all helped me to become very close with the community. And I'll start off with George's question. Obviously, I've heard a lot about all different ways of which Jewish people have been rescued. In fact, I've watched quite a few films here in London with my Polish friends, with the embassy. We had once a film in the West End where we saw firsthand where there was Polish people going out of the way and different types. There were people who hid Jewish people in the basements. They had a special hole for downstairs, and when the Nazis used to knock on the door, they would check up if there's any children, and they would have, people would have up to 20 children hiding downstairs and looking after them. And to be quite honest, when I watched this film, and my closeness generally to the Polish community, it's continued. There is something about the Polish community where they are very, very, very warm people and very caring. And when I look at it, I'm really like, I feel that it's the opposite of what my colleague said before. I was actually born Jewish, so I grew up Jewish. But I'm proud, and this happened in 2006. I started taking a lot of interest in my Polish part. So I done more research, and I found out, you know, my mother was from Wrocław, and the first time I actually went to Poland was, I remember it because it was the day when France played Italy in the final, and I arrived in Krakow. And, you know, obviously it was one of my first European countries I had visited, and I didn't know what to expect, because when I went to France the first time, I had tear gas poured at me, and I was flat out straight away. And when I came to Poland, also again, the kind of caring, and I'll start off, I stayed in Krakow in Kazimierz Dolna, and I actually felt I was in Jerusalem. The whole place there, the way it's set out, it still has kept the Jewish culture, is still all there, ready for the community to move in. I've been in other countries where the countries have totally neglected the whole Jewish part of what we left behind. And when I was in Poland, and I can say mainly Krakow, but obviously other cities also, it was amazing to see the way the whole government is so proud of our culture. And this really took me, I've been 8 times to Poland now. And when somebody asks me, which is your favorite city in Poland, because my favorite country is Poland, there's no question about it. But when they ask me, which is your favorite city, I have to think. And then my answer is, well, I haven't been to Wrocław yet, so don't ask me why. I should have been there because my mother's from there. But I start hesitating because I love Krakow, I love Warsaw, and then Leszczyńsk is something where Rabbi Ali Meilech is. So this is also something that takes my heart. And again, the way we actually went on a trip, some of us, together with Philip, and the way the mayor of Leszczyńsk takes an interest that the place should stay and be a special cared after place. For me, this is, you know, it's just unbelievable. Again, when you go in Krakow, you still see not even Hebrew, Yiddish, which is on the buildings, still on the bricks. I'm sure some of you who have been to Kazimierz will know what I'm talking about. On the bricks of the buildings, you can see proper words in Yiddish. And I've not seen this in any other country where these things have stayed, where we have left. For instance, there was a big community in Hungary, in Slovakia, and I haven't seen all that. So for me, when I finally identified myself as a Pole in 2006, and ever since then I've been growing into it, it got to the stage where my football team now is Poland. So I have, funny enough, I have a Polish T-shirt, and in the back, because the Spurs fans, we call ourselves the Yids. So I put the Yid on the back of my T-shirt as a thing, and I actually walked with it in Krakow, and people were very nice and very excited. So again, we've heard from all the speakers about different things, people who have saved. I've seen a lot of different. I've even spoken to people privately who tell me they remember their grandmother. Even after the war, she was lighting the candles for the Shabbos, and people who had managed to survive, and the way they were being looked after by non-Jewish people. People were telling me, I met people who looked after Jewish children, and I was amazed, and still am amazed, to see, the work and the closeness that went on the time. And again, a lot of countries just looked on because everything was happening. They brought people from all different countries to murder them in Poland. From Slovakia, they brought over shipments. I mean, my grandfather, who didn't survive, he was taken from Slovakia and killed in Poland. But again, this was from Slovakia. And it's very upsetting to see that nobody helped Poland, and we were there just on our own to fight all this. And I can probably talk all day, all night about this whole thing, but you've heard a lot already about from different things. I just want to finish off by saying I have tried to connect with many other communities, especially Slovakia, because my father is Slovakian. But the warmth that comes in the Polish community when you talk to people, when I walked in here today, it took me 10 minutes to get into the room, meeting friends, and good friends and genuine friends, because it's the way the Polish people are. So I'm just grateful to be part of it, and I'm slowly getting more and more into the fact that I am Polish, which is great. So I just wanted to thank again everybody for listening to me today, and I'm very happy to be part of the Polish family, and I'll hand over to. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you're doing, Simka. Could I come back to Roger? There was a question that popped out, and got the microphone. There was a question that popped out that the West did not help the Jews, while the West knew at some point definitively that Holocaust is happening. That the murdering of Jews is happening on a massive scale. It's not just Witold Bielecki, Ankarski, some of the Polish diplomats, messengers and spies that provided the West with the information about what's happening, but it's the Jews themselves that were with the Paraguayan or Brazilian passports that moved to the West. They informed, they said, we are getting murdered, and yet there was no decisive action. There are various historians bring up theories of the rail tracks that could have been bombed. Even parts of Auschwitz could have been bombed. That would maybe not stop the Holocaust, but slow it down. Why do you think that was the case?
There was another question that came up from Czesław, which I would like to I'll come to that in a moment, if I may. There was a very crucial point that you raised when you said what is legal, what constitutes a legal passport, which is actually a very important question, and this was a question that was raised at the time. Throughout 1943, as I said, there was this sort of it was actually from the Swiss authorities began to investigate what the Ładoś group were doing, and they were sort of pulling in those peripheral to it, and then eventually the group themselves pulling them in for interrogation. And it was interrogation, and saying, what are you doing? And nobody hid what they were doing. They all said, this is a humanitarian operation, we are trying to save lives, and this is how it works. And they laid out how the system worked. And the Swiss attitude, as you can probably imagine, apologies if there are any Swiss citizens in the room, was absolute legalistic punctiliousness. This must not happen. And the response of the chief of police, the Swiss chief of police, in one of these discussions with Runiewicz, actually, in his interrogation, Runiewicz says, this is a humanitarian operation. This is why we are doing it. And the chief of police of Switzerland says, I don't care what you're doing, just don't do it on Swiss soil. Which is shocking. We're talking about the Holocaust. Holocaust is, to come back to your question, George, the Holocaust is relatively well known, certainly from the end of 42 onwards, that this is what's going on. There are questions in the House of Commons about it, there's publicity around what's going on. We certainly knew at the end of 1942 that there is the mass killing of Jews, systematic, industrialised mass killing of Jews in German-occupied Poland, carried out by the Nazis and their allies. That is clear. So anyone that is denying that, certainly up until 1944, this week I was reading American diplomatic traffic, and there was a memo from an official of the State Department who said, I think it was in March 44, he says, it's an exaggeration to claim that hundreds of thousands of Poles will be killed if we don't allow these passports to be recognised, because this is the question of recognition. He's still effectively denying what's going on, and this is a State Department official in the spring of 1944, which I found absolutely shocking. So this question of what is legal is very interesting, because Ładosia says, well, these are passports that have been done by the honorary consul. There's nothing wrong with them. They've all been done in the usual way. So he's saying these are legal passports. Of course, the Swiss had an absolute rejection of that because it was irregular. And interesting, that rejection also extended to the State Department. So the US rejected the idea, on principle, that these could be sort of temporarily recognised or overlooked, that you could overlook the sort of irregular nature of the way they'd been issued. The State Department was absolutely clear that that was unacceptable and was not to be condoned. In contrast, and this is what I think is the key actually to the whole story, in contrast, you look at the person of Ładosia, and Ładosia is sort of the figurehead of this operation, and he does go into bat, to use that wonderful British phrase. He goes into bat to defend his colleagues who are being interrogated and so on. And he is the conduit back to London to say, please, lend a shoulder to the wheel, write to the State Department, tell them what's going on, that we need to get these things recognised. So he's very important on that level. But crucially, I think the person of Ładosia is actually quite significant here as well, because Ładosia himself as a young man was expelled from, was given an internal exile punishment. He lived in Austria-Hungary, in Galicia. And for sort of agitating for Polish nationalism, he was given a punishment where he was sent to Tyrol as a punishment, internal exile. And he escaped from Tyrol into Switzerland using a forged passport. So he knew that this was, again, it's the sort of you could almost say it's the difference between a Swiss and a Polish mentality. The Poles had lived under partition for 123 years and only regained statehood in 1918. They had this precious Second Republic that they would do anything to defend, and they defend it in 1939, as we know. But there's an attitude towards semi-legal activity, shall we say, that is very different from the attitude of the Swiss or the attitude of the State Department. And Ładosia is the living embodiment of that, because he had used a forged passport to escape from his internal exile in, I think it was 1915. So you can see that his attitude towards forging passports for humanitarian purposes is going to be radically different from that of the Chief of Police of Switzerland. And I think that's a crucial point to make, that this isn't necessarily, you raised the question as well, Czesław, is this just sort of circumstances or is it individuals? There's always that question in history, is it great men or great women, or is it just circumstances, socio-economic forces, all that stuff. But here you can see, actually, I think there's a personal influence in there. And you can see it in Ładosia, and I think you can see it in the others as well, because people like Rychlewicz in Istanbul that we heard about down the line from the south of France. There are enough examples of people actually going out of their way to do something really, humanitarian, in its intention and really thoroughly honourable, with no reward to themselves at all. And I think that's something that needs to be borne in mind. That was a very long diversion to come back to your first question. I apologise. The question of why the West doesn't do anything. I think
Roger, could I just interrupt you for 1 second? I think this is enormously interesting what you've brought up there, because Germans at that time, pretty much most of the things that they did and committed, the atrocities, were legal. The German mind was very legalistic. The Nazi Party was legalistic. So I've read some, of course, at some point they've realized what's happening with the passports produced by Ładosia and the group, and they tricked the Jews, they took money themselves, and then they killed them nonetheless. But there was a time where they knew that these passports are actually legal, even though they were produced in an irregular way, because that consul of the Paraguayan embassy in Switzerland was he was doing it he was taking money for it, and he was doing it sort of not many people knew about it, but these were real passports. So that it was a real passport that was sent to the Jews, and many Germans at the beginning, with that legalistic approach, thought, well, that's a citizen of Paraguay, we need to treat him differently. And I've read some memoirs where Germans really had issues with it, and immediately they sent some Jews to different camps, and their stories were different. But I just wanted to add that, because it's really fascinating to compare how people approached the legality of what they were doing.
Yeah, and it's an important point to mention that actually in the process of the Holocaust, in preparing the Holocaust, you mentioned this idea of Nazi Germany is a highly legalistic state, and we kind of when we think about Nazi Germany, we think about the Holocaust, we think about the Gestapo, we think about the atrocities. It almost seems chaotic, but it was highly legalistic. And what they were doing when they were preparing the Holocaust is effectively creating an extra legal space in which they could put the Jews. So if you were deported, for example, if you were a German Jew and you were deported from Germany, which they were from 1941 onwards, into occupied Poland and elsewhere, as soon as you crossed the German frontier, you lost your status as a German national. So you effectively had no rights. You were a stateless person. And in that situation, the German authorities can do with you what they want. You have no right to ask for asylum, to ask for any help from any other state at all. So what the Germans are doing in preparing the Holocaust is creating an extra legal space, a space beyond law. It's not lawless, but it's beyond law. And what the Ładoś passports does, and just to correct you, George, if I may, those people whether it's in the Warsaw Ghetto or Łódź Ghetto or in the camps, they have a sort of notarized copy of their passport. It's not the passport itself, it's a piece of paper, literally. And if they hold that up and say, hang on, I'm a citizen of Paraguay, even at the moment that they're being deported, it just reintroduces that whiff of legality again, that suddenly the guards are going to go, this person is not actually, we can't do with them what we want, because there's a possibility they might be Paraguayan. So it just sort of put a stick in the wheel of that German creation of an extra legal space, and that's I think is an important point to remember about how this actually worked.
Well, yes, thank you. And could we come back to that question about West helping the Jews?
This is a very vexed question, and I do sometimes a little bit balk at. It gets trotted out all the time, this idea that British or Americans could have bombed, they could have bombed Auschwitz, they couldn't bomb rail lines. I mean, the accuracy of Allied bombing, even towards the end of the war, is simply not good enough to bomb rail lines to Auschwitz. It just wasn't. If you go back slightly earlier, there was a thing in 1941. The British carried out a study of their bombing, the accuracy of their bombing, and this gives you an idea. We project back because we can drop a bomb into a drain nowadays, and we couldn't do anything like that back in the Second World War. But the Butch Report, which was published in 1941 by the British, was a study of the accuracy of bombing, and they on the basis of what they'd already done up to 1941, they calculated that I think it was only 30% of British bombs actually dropped on the target. And they defined the target as anywhere within 5 miles of the target, right? So that shows you how inaccurate Allied bombing was. So the idea of bombing rail lines is a non-starter. It was technologically impossible. You could have bombed Auschwitz, you could have bombed Birkenau because it's big enough to hit from the air. And this is what, of course, Bielecki begged the Allies to do. If you go back to, I think, 41, when that first missive was sent out by Bielecki. But I think that would have been a very big call for the Chief of Air Staff or whoever it might be to actually say, okay, we're going to bomb a camp and actually take into account that we're going to kill prisoners. So that really wasn't a starter. Beyond that, the Allied policy was very much one of, we know the Holocaust is happening because we know about it from late 42 onwards. The best thing to do to save the Jews, save whatever Jews are left by that point, is effectively to win the war and to speed the winning of the war. So that idea that anything could be done specifically to save Jews of Europe is militarily is a non-starter. They sort of roll that into just winning the war as fast as possible and doing it as effectively as possible. On the other point, there is increasing pressure diplomatically to say that, to put the message out that we know what's going on, we will punish the perpetrators after the war, so that there's sort of propaganda messaging that this will not go unpunished is very strong from the middle of the war onwards. So it's not as though there was nothing done at all. But I still, as I said, I still find it shocking when you read, the account of a State Department official effectively saying that, these people are not going to suffer if we don't recognise their passports, because it's obvious to our eyes, with the benefit of hindsight, that those people were going to be killed. So it's still shocking that there's still elements there where either they're denying it themselves because it's very difficult to sort of take on board the enormity of the Holocaust. And this was something that Jan Karski discovered when he went to Washington, of course. I'm sure some of you know the story of Karski going to Washington and giving this presentation to the Chief Justice, who was himself Jewish, about the Holocaust and what, chapter and verse of what was going on in occupied Poland. And the response was, I can't believe you, because it's simply, it's too big for them to take on board. So there's an element of that as well. We have to guard against sort of projecting back with too much hindsight, because this was an enormous event that was hard for some of these officials to actually take on board precisely what it meant.
Thank you. Mr. Bielecki, any comments from you? You were very humble in speaking about yourself, but you were there at the very beginning in finding out about the Ładoś list. Would you like to reveal a little bit more about your involvement?
I think it's a very good issue to raise, saying that as in Thomas Mann novel Joseph and his brothers, this from the Bible, the story from the Bible, there's one phrase extremely important when Joseph is done this well, quite with broken legs and completely left by his brothers, and suddenly he's finding an idea that until now, until this momentum, he didn't know in what history the God sentenced him to be the hero. In what history we are the hero. And I think that's a very nice and crucial credo. So Ładoś knew in what history he should be the hero. And Rokicki knew it. And some allies didn't know in what history they became politicians. And until now we know many stories in which people don't want to imagine. I have my own private credo that in politics everybody knows what he has to know, what he wants to know, what he wants to know. People don't want to know. That's very recent. They don't want to know. But when they want to know, sometimes they can't react. And Timothy Snyder, in his books, indicated something very painful, that in the countries which weren't occupied, as Hungary, because of this legal aspect, Jews survived because an awful law is better than a situation which is completely outlaw. The reflection you shared with us about this unlegal status of a Jew who was exported from Germany. With Jarek Nowak, we were working 15, 16 years ago on the monument in Łódź of monument of last European ghetto. And when I was asked by mayor of Łódź, Kropivnicki, to what I think about this story, and I went and I have seen a small wooden barrack, which is interior is narrower than this hall and as long as this hall. And through this wooden barrack went to death 160,000 Jews. That's quite unimaginable. And now this barrack was staying along the rails of the existing railway and active railway road. This barrack is between many, stocks and industrial buildings. So how a young man now, as some of you in the hall, may imagine staying on the front of this barrack, what happened? When I am going on the motorway and I see man brand on the tracks, I still remember that Germans killed all those Jews from Germany, Czech Republic, Poland, Luxembourg. They killed in this kind of trucks, just with exhausts of the gas, yes. Just very simply. So from this barrack, I told Kropivnicki, look, that's a question of a figure. Whether this figure 160,000 people is imaginable. And because of this German systematics, in Łódź archives survived such a A4 pages with the names, professions, and how many kids from Düsseldorf or Berlin or Prague or Vienna, and under was always, it was checked. It was signed and checked. So systematics is systematics. And I think the whole challenge is about, after your description of Polish mentality, which is very close to Jewish sentimentalism, by the way, I think this mental aspect is extremely important. And because we are discussing this, just to make our discussion a bit lighter, I may tell you that I was arrested with my partner in undergrad business and my wife, Maria Twardowska, in 1985, in spring, because a messenger from Switzerland was pursued by political police. So we went all to jail, and they started to interrogate him, and because I was staying in silence, my wife as well, but after 1 week or 2 weeks, she started to avoid. Okay, we met again in Geneva after 3 or 4 years in '88, and I told him, look, it's a fantastic story. You fought at hands of cannibals. And when they started to interrogate you, and you were quite convinced they are eating people, regular people, you started to eat us with them because you fought at hands of cannibals. And suddenly those cannibals asked our Swiss friend from where you had money to buy all those type machines and printing materials for our underground publishing house. And suddenly, being half cannibal, he walked up and said, "But that's my bank account. That's my money." So I told him, "Look, that's very significant feature of your mentality. You are a brave guy, you came, you were helping us. And when you found an environment which transformed you totally, suddenly you walked up when they asked you about bank account." So I think that's, let's say, that's a bit tragicomic aspect of difference between different nations and societies. I love Poland and I love Poles because we have this special approach to legal system and special approach to what is right and what's wrong. And I think this human scale is the most important. So we judge our governors, we judge our politicians along this principle, whether their slogans and their principles are close to our common sense and to our historical experience. When they say we wanted but we didn't, we are saying, okay, as commies wanted as well. It was a paradise of wishful thinking. So don't come back to this paradise of wishful thinking. So I think from this tragic times we may took some conclusions, and one of them I expressed very directly to Jan Tigros in polemics with his books, and I told him that what we survived, it's a sign that there's no place for collective responsibility of Poles or Jews or Russians, and there's no place for collective irresponsibility or unresponsibility. But we have to be responsible for our own communities. We are living within a certain circle, and we have to be responsible for the circle in which we are living. To judge it properly without, let's say, extremism and without false tolerance. To be human, just to be human being.
Thank you. Mr. Beck, we've heard from Mr. Bielecki that some people want to know, some people don't want to know. I would guess that after finding out such incredible stories as the one about the Ładoś group, we would want them to be the superheroes, not just in Poland, not just in Israel, but maybe all around the world. But I have heard that according to one survey, maybe half of Americans do not know what happened, half of young Americans do not know what happened during the Holocaust, and also a very high percentage of Americans do not know who was responsible for the Holocaust. And it's just a survey in one country. Do you think that there will be a time, or is there some way for us to make the Ładoś group a superhero group that we will be able to teach to our children and grandchildren? Well, we may have lost you. Maybe it's the Vichy France that is playing a trick. We hear you now and we see you.
Okay, perfect. I'm not so sure we have to worry ourselves with what the Americans know or don't know, because otherwise we will be heading towards a complete despair. We have to concentrate on what we, Poles, Israelis, Europeans, know about this period, and we have to, there's still a lot to discover. And I think that these stories about the Polish rescuing, the official Polish rescue of Jews, is something that has to be studied in depth and be explored. Now, I would like first of all to clarify something about the legality of this operation, because as far as I know, it was a complete illegal operation, which means that the consulates of the Latin American countries were supplying for money. Blank documents, absolutely with nothing on them except for the official writings. And then the Jews were not allowed to use them at all, because the governments of those councils didn't know that they were actually dealing and getting money for selling these documents. Yeah. So the whole thing of illegality is extremely important, because if it was legal, then what are we actually talking about? There was no risk, and therefore the members of this group were not such heroes as we believe they were. Secondly, I think that we have to try and imagine how complicated this whole operation was. We have to think about communication not in the sense of the 21st century, but as it was at the time. Everything had to be somehow, the information had to go through telegrams, lists that were actually passing illegally through borders in a state of war. And there was money that had to be transferred from America to London, from London to Switzerland. And all this took place in, not in the communication systems that we know today. It was extremely, extremely complicated, to such an extent that the exiled government the Polish exiled government in London asked the Polish diplomats in Switzerland to stop sending them too many telegrams because they couldn't cope with the intensity of this communication. It was a huge operation, and this is something that has to be clarified as well. Now, what do we know? I want to give you maybe my personal point of view. I am a product of the Israeli education system. I was born in the 60s, I went to school in the 70s, 80s, and at the time there were not any or very little connections with Poland. We didn't know anything about Poland, and we did have connections with Germany, Western Germany at the time. And a certain process that happened between Israelis and West Germans did not happen between Israelis and Poles, which means that with the time we got the wrong impression that actually the Germans, I must admit that I also
Putin or Xi.
We know that Poland had an anti-Semitism problem well before the German occupation, and to a certain extent we've only seen it recently. However, ignoring the fact that there were so many Poles that actually let's to say it's true history. And I took personally as an opportunity to learn things that I didn't know about what
yes.
And I think that this is something that people.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, there were some disconnection issues, so we couldn't hear your comment in full, but we've heard most of it, and I think that was enormously important. So thank you for sharing your personal experience with us. Simke, coming back to the modern times, you're an example of a person that has created locally something very successful between the Jewish community and Polish community in Hackney. You've organized numerous events. promoting mutual history. You've organized events in Parliament where you promoted the Pole-saving Jews, but also what happened, what was the story of the Jewish community in Poland for hundreds and hundreds of years. You've contributed enormously, and as well, you know, a lot of Jewish and Polish businesses that cooperate in Hackney together. Could you tell us a little bit about the modern times from your perspective in that part of London, and how important it is that we use these examples of, for example, the Ładoś group today?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm normally not one of the speakers. I was a lastminute.com today, so I was told about 3 o'clock that I'm going to talk. We've had many of experiences. I mentioned before Philip Shilpatrick, who I've done a lot of work with him, or he's done a lot of work with me, whichever way we want to say it. I mean, Philip has organized barbecues in his gardens, which was Polish and Jewish community, and we have our organization is called the Polish Friends of Conservative, because there seems to be a conservative friend of Poland, but it's just the name. We don't see much activity in that one, so we formed a new group called the Polish Friends of Conservative. We did make a journey, because obviously I'm a Spurs fan, so we chose to make a journey to Wembley, and we chose, there was 4 Polish people of our organization, 2 Jewish people and 2 English people, and we went down to watch Tottenham playing a game. And we've done many bigger events which involved, like George was saying, we had in Parliament it was an open day for all the Polish people in the whole England. Anybody could come if they booked. And we're doing a lot of work with the Polish community. In fact, tomorrow, those of you who are coming tomorrow evening, you will see that we'll probably have about 50 or 60 people from our organization also coming. And to be honest, this is a journey, because you learn new things and you learn different things. And I must say, I sometimes look at myself and I wonder what got me into politics. You know, why have I put myself into politics? But when I take out the good stories, like learning a new community, you know, beforehand I had no connection whatsoever with the Polish community. For that alone, that experience was worthwhile to become a politician. I mean, I'm not this typical politician who wants to become an MP or going places. I'm just a councillor. But I do want to continue my connection with the Polish and Jewish community even after I retire my councillorship. Because the one thing I noticed is that in Stamford Hill, we don't talk about it so much perhaps. You always hear about the way the Polish and Muslim community live, but the Polish and Jewish community have got a very good understanding together. And there's a lot of work still to be done, but we live together and we like each other and we respect each other. And so much so, lately, I found out a lot of, going back obviously to the main topic of today, there are a lot of young Polish people who are looking into their backgrounds, and there is this trend. I know a few Polish people who have found out they are Jewish, and they're starting to practice the Judaism and becoming back Jewish. So it's very interesting the way, you know, working together and finding out different things and learning different things. And again, I'm proud of being able to be here today and, you know, put my side forward and say, you know, my experiences. And obviously this goes back to before the war, where the Polish people were saving the Jewish people from trouble. And I just wanted to finish off by one thing perhaps on what you picked up before. I think there's a little bit a misunderstanding about what Judaism is, in the way that, you know, yes, there is Israel, but Zionist is not necessarily Judaism. you can be a Zionist and you're not a Jew, and you can be a Jew and not a Zionist. They don't work hand in hand. So I'm an Orthodox Jew, but I'm not a Zionist. And I think a lot of people think that automatically if you're Jewish, you're Zionist. But it's two different things. So I think I wanted to just explain that because, you know, sometimes you get mixed up. And if you tell the average Jew, oh, you're Jewish, you must be Zionists, they get confused. And I'll finish off by saying, you know, I'm looking forward, because this is just the beginning of this whole 2-day event. And I'm looking forward to hearing more. I mean, I feel like gobsmacked. I'm sitting here with such a great speakers, and I've been put here also. It's like, how can you put me? It's like putting Madonna together with I don't know who. You know, it's like, it's just it's the first time I've actually sat down and taken the chair and spoken with other great speakers. So I feel really, and this also comes only because we have trust in each other. The Polish and Jewish relationship just continues. So they've put me here in the chair, trusting and hoping that I will perform. And obviously, I'm just saying what I know, but I really am grateful for this, and I think we have to just work more. And again, I must mention it again, the work that Philip has done in the past for the community, you know, getting us here and everything, and George and Mariusz and everybody, it's very helpful. I remember when I first had my connection 16 years ago, I was invited on a very regular basis to the embassy. There was a lot of things going on specifically for the Jewish community, and it was very great. Even now I get invited sometimes, and it's just the connection is really good between the Polish and Jewish community, and that's great. You can't walk into another embassy and say, oh, what are you doing for the Jewish community? Because they'll look at you, what? But when you go to the Polish embassy, it's just part of it. It's automatically, it's in the system, and that's, you know, I'm a proud Pole Jew because it's just there, and it's great that the infrastructure is there. We just have to work on it more. So George, I'll finish off by this, and I thank again everybody who came today and, you know, was part of this, and this is great. You know, I feel great that I could be here today, and thanks everybody.
Yes, thank you so much, Simka. And it is true that you were asked to join the panel today at 3 p.m. Because of one of our other honorable guests that couldn't make it. But your words were definitely coming from your heart, so we definitely appreciate it. And just to remind everyone, the first time I properly met Simka, that was 2014, at a protest against the discrimination of Polish people, and Simka took the microphone and said that he will fight against anti-Polonism just as much as he fights against anti-Semitism. And those words struck me because you don't hear them that often, but that was very beautiful, and it really shows that you're such a Polish Jew with such love. So that's greatly appreciated. We have some time for a few questions today. So is anybody courageous to go first? There is a question from the gentleman there. Mariusz, could you kindly help me? Just here to the right.
Oh, thank you. And maybe it's not a question, just a statement. Yeah, well, related to the Jewish during the war, my grandfather was quite a large landowner, and during the war, quite a lot of Jewish people was in his place. And obviously during the war, quite a lot of German bring quite a lot of cows to his estate. And during the night, quite a lot of fall actually just disappeared for the Jewish resistance and in the various forests. Side effect of that particular incident, that my mother and my her sister, twin sister, was actually taken to the concentration camp, Treblinka and Sobibor, and then and her brother as well. And after the war, obviously, probably some resistance was still there, and my grandfather with the children was evicted from his estate and said, don't come back again. So he moved to New Poland. There was quite bitter of the subject of that, and then quite a lot of Jewish people probably was working during the night to milk the cows and remove the foal and only things that I So I give a God bless for the rest of the Jewish people who survived. And in 95 was about 400 Jews who came to the hotels in South Kensington. All those people survived the trip to Australia on the boat from England. And I went there to see them and said, well, theoretically English didn't want them, so they sent to Australia. Now sent to South Africa. And one of the boats was sunk actually before going to South Africa. So the first boat was actually sunk before we came to England. The second boat sank before they go to South Africa. And the captain on the third boat, which is about 200 Jews, actually was sent to concentrating camp in Australia. And from that, actually they moved all around the world. And about 350 came back to that hotel near South Kensington. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comment. Who would like to go next? Mrs. Hamilton, please.
I want to ask you such a question. Why didn't you ask for this debate the ambassador of Germany, sat him here, and then we never mentioned Germany here. We mentioned Poles and Jews go
No, we mentioned.
Why there is no representative of Germany who would have to say something to us? Then we could say, now, Mr. Ambassador, we have a little chamber for you with a nice drink. Would you like to come in? And there's a little chamber with gas. And we will see what he will say. We will sort of say, well, there is a tiny little gas chamber and we just are trying to new gas. And why don't we do something stronger than this?
I understand there is time for jokes, but perhaps a little note about everything that we are discussing today could be sent to a number of embassies, and it definitely will be. The reason of today's meeting is for us to gather and to discuss some of these difficult topics from the past. There's media here that will prepare a lot of reports, that both in Polish and in English, and they will be sent to all the embassies. But if I could throw in a question to some of our guests. So we know that the official number of the Polish righteous among the nations is the highest amongst every other nation, despite the death penalty in occupied Poland at that time. The number is, I think, almost 7,000. But we've also heard of many other people that were helping Jews, and you can see that, for example, Aleksandra Ładosia, who was a remarkable man who's done something inhumane, insane actually, of doing it on such a scale and still managing to save hundreds of people. How many Polish people were involved in such activity? Perhaps Roger or Mr. Bielecki, would you be able to say the number of Poles involved in helping Jews? I've heard of various figures, but from your research, from your knowledge, except for the almost 7,000 righteous, what could have been the number?
You know, that's a really good question, because I'm the less gifted son of a mathematician, so I'm very strong in arithmetics, working as an architect, and I'm stressing that always to all engineers and to all my clients that arithmetics, that's my preferable, let's say, job. And the question is not well cut, sorry. Because to let survive someone from my own experience in very lucky times, to be underground or pursued or to be hidden, one has to have the network of 15 to 25 people minimum on a certain trajet, on a certain road, let's say, when it lasts. To be lost, to be killed, it's one denunciator, that's enough. For instance, the author of our first book, Elementarz, I don't know what's the name of first book in English. The first book, debut. So Marian Falski, he was author between 1916 and the 60s. So his debut lasted a long time. He was very known. He was working in the post office during the war, and he was just destroying and throwing as litters denunciations. In totalitarian system we went through in communism, denunciation is something recent. First of all, when denunciator is not punished, is let's say is paid for his denunciation. So all those figures are mystifying the realm. I had an exchange of idea with my co-partner in this debate whether you have the neologism in English of this extrapolation of the present to the past. We say between Polish historians presentism. It means that someone is saying, oh, in this position I will save Jews, or I will escape, or I will fight in the forest against communists. It's very, very light approach. I think we may only say, I think, I imagine, I dream about my own behavior in this time. Because we can't exchange roles. We can't put ourselves lightly in the position of others. I think a lot of people was helping Jews. All people who criticize behavior of co-citizens are using this false approach, extrapolating his own morality or his own image of their morality, what they will do in such a position. I know that people brave, honest, are rather mental minority when the stress of time and the stress of the system is so hard. So I admire, I acknowledge all people who were saving their co-citizens, and I think that the proportion between the network of people we needed to be saved or to be active in the underground in proportion to people who were denunciators is always very let's say, it's always under consideration. So the final Rechnung, the final balance sheet, it's impossible to be done. It's impossible to manage. For instance, only in Poland and let's say in the eastern countries, it was with death penalty for helping Jews, to give them water or a piece of bread. And compare it with, let's say, resistance of Danish people or with Dutch people is something which we can't compare. It's as contradictory and to some extent bizarre as famous English saying that during German invasion we wouldn't invite them to our homes. But we couldn't invite. We know from famous Vercors novel, a French writer, The Silence of the Sea, that the silence, the refusal, was sometimes the sign of a courage. So that's extremely difficult to say, oh, myself in the position of citizen of a totalitarian state, I would do, I will do. It's a must, of course. That's light moralism. That's extremely hypocritic, because we don't know what we do under a certain stress. More than that, sometimes there were some heroes who became denunciators. There were some people who betrayed their co-citizens and suddenly they became the heroes. I still remember in Israel being the advisor to President Wałęsa when he went out from Yad Vashem Museum with all those atrocities, and an Israeli journalist approached to him and said, "And now what you will say?" And Wałęsa, who had very inventive spirit in Polish language, as we know, suddenly, and I was staying close to him, said, "You know, you ask me such a hard question. I have seen heroes who became Lilliputs, and I have seen Lilliputs who became heroes. So think about it." And only the silence was at the end of this exchange of ideas. So I think we have to admire and to acknowledge heroes. We have to be very modest towards ourselves. And we have not to stay in silence when we see this kind of aggression with such a, as we say in Russian, maskirovka, with such a falsification we approach now in Poland on our eastern border. Because it's extremely simple to judge it and to say, oh, in your position I will do that or that. But we know that the real political challenge, a national challenge, and European challenge is quite difficult. It's quite difficult. That's very contradictory, because we know that Belarus, independent in 1 quarter, is better than Russian Republic, completely oppressed by Putin, but parallelly we acknowledge the heroism and spirit of freedom of Belarusian society, and we know that we are on the eastern boundary of European Union and we have to defend this boundary. And those 3 couple of answers are interconnected. So I think that in many situations, Polish people living with Jewish community oppressed had different complicated challenges. My own father used to say to Jews, I don't know if the situation will be vice versa. Your behavior will be better. I wonder not. Because first of all, we have to struggle with hermetism, with auto self-isolationism, with this spirit, there are those others, we don't care. And that's extremely difficult to say whether we ourselves in such a situation, we will be as courageous as those writers between the nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, we still have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions. Mr. Wajda here and Mr. Szlibaczek. And maybe if we have time for the 3rd question.
Yes, such a debate raises probably more questions than you are trying to answer now. But some people say I'm oversensitive when it comes to anti-Polonism. And I have sensed some of the issues here which I wanted to bring up. It's minor, yeah? Mr. Simke, when you said that the Jews were brought to Poland to be executed, I think you have always have to say it. They were brought to occupied Poland, which Mr. Moorhouse corrected later. But I think we need to take it even further, because part of Poland was annexed to Germany, and where Oświęcim is, Auschwitz, that was part of Germany. So that was German territory where it was built. And we cannot say under any circumstances that was Poland. Poland did not exist. There was no Polish government. We can't take any responsibility for it. So it's just, I'm oversensitive, so I think it's just worth mentioning that. And it's very good we discuss this subject, but the question is, what do we do with it? Where do we take the message? And I think I will have a question to the gentleman, I'm sorry I forgot his name, in south of France, because a lot of teenagers from Israel come to Poland, and they see only concentration camps, and then they go to Germany to enjoy themselves. I think that has to change, because these people later grow up to become politicians, people who lead the country, and what they remember from Poland is the place where Jewish people suffered. And very often the blame is put on Polish people because it's a natural association, You went to Poland and you saw where our ancestors suffered or were killed, and that's Poland. Poland, I think that has to change.
Okay, thank you. Could we please have a short answer? Simka, would you like to reply to the first question, and then Mr. Beck, if the internet connection will allow us?
Okay, just a quick...
Sorry, could Simke Steinberger go first, please?
Sure.
Sorry, I was wondering what the verse was. I think I didn't think it had to be clear enough. It's very clear that the Germans were the ones who occupied Poland, and they were the ones who done it. There's no even question about it. I'm surprised that you even think that I said something different. In fact, the amount of Polish people that were killed by the Germans in Poland was also, I believe, also very, very high figures. So just to clarify very clear, the Germans actually took over Poland, and they took over other countries also besides Poland, but it was the Poland where they used to do their dirty work. The Germans should have done their dirty work in their own country, but they used Poland as their place, and definitely it wasn't Poland who done this nasty things which the Germans were doing the whole time.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Beck, I don't know whether you've heard the question. The question addressed to you was that is there more that can be done for the various Jewish school trips to see more of Poland rather than just the concentration camps? Is there a chance to show them Poland as well?
Well, I don't think that tourism should be any part of the curriculum of any schools. I have another suggestion, which is that all these trips should start in Germany, and I have been talking about it for years. We cannot concentrate on sending the pupils to the German deaths in Poland on Polish soil without explaining to them the whole process of what happened. Without taking them to Nuremberg, without taking them to Wannsee, without taking them to Sachsenhausen, and explaining to them the responsibility of the Germans. So everything has to start in Germany, and once you have understood what really happened and how it developed into being Holocaust, you go and end your trips in Poland. Now, this is something that has to be agreed by all the concerned governments. I think it has to be a program that should be developed jointly by the German, Israeli, and Polish government. I think that the German government, instead of pouring unbelievable sums of money to anti-Israeli organizations, some of them involved in terrorism, should actually take this money
private email. The cell is
another basis of understanding for the coming generations from these three different countries about the joint history that they are having, the tragic, but maybe also the positive one. So there is absolutely something that has to be done. I don't think that tourism should be part of it, but definitely Germany should be the beginning because everything started with Germany.
Thank you very much. I think we still have maybe one question, maybe to Rosie, but we're just about to end. Philip, please.
Good evening, everybody. First and foremost, first and foremost, Marius, thank you very much indeed for sending an invitation to me. Sipka on a number of occasions referred to me. I've been involved in Polish-Jewish dialogue for over 15 years. I had the honour of being awarded the Civil Cross of Merit by the previous president, which I am as a proud Polish citizen as I hold a Polish passport, and I'm also the son of a Polish Jew who fought at Monte Cassino. The comments I would like to make in the observations with Mr. Moorhouse, I believe, with the one person that did come from Poland, Shmuel Ziegelberg, a Jew, he committed suicide. I'm sorry, I must take issue with you. The Allies knew about it, and it served the purpose that they didn't want to deal with it because they would have had to deal with the Palestine problem afterwards, and the foreign officers didn't want to upset the Arabs. That's the first thing. Okay.
To be fair, I didn't say that they didn't know. I was
no,
very clear in saying that they knew.
Fine, okay, but I'm trying to say, from my perspective, my views are very nuanced. I'm born here, Polish father, Monte Cassino veteran, but Jewish blood.
Have a look.
Okay, although I'm not halakhically Jewish. Okay, right. Number two, the other point which is mentioned, and I'll direct this to Israel. The Germans were very, very clever after the war. They paid out Geldblut, blood money. And as a consequence of that, we do not hear the word German mentioned with atrocities. It's always this fictitious word Nazi. Nazis were a political party. The Jews murdered in the German concentration camps on occupied Polish territory were murdered by the German state, democratically elected by the Nazis, not Nazis. The problem in Israel, and I've been to Israel, I've met Netanyahu, I met Rivlin, the previous Prime Minister and President, and on those views I must categorically state that Israel must start looking at who perpetrated the Holocaust. The Poles have a problem. They have a guilt complex. It's from their Catholicism. If you go to any other country in Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they murdered the Jews before the Germans even arrived. But they don't have this sort of guilt problem. And the Poles, because of their sentimentality, their knowing what's right and wrong, have been traumatized by that. And it's now up to the Israeli state to now look and start teaching their children where this disaster, which you commented, and I compliment you, back to Germany. Final point, the modern German is a fantastic person. I will have nothing said about a modern German. But what their parents, grandparents and great-grandparents should never, ever be forgiven. End. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we take up the last question as well from the gentleman in the first row?
Thank you. At first, I want to say again thank you to Mr. Simka for your very warm words towards Polish nations. Anyway, my question is, unfortunately, the gentleman said what I wanted to say before, and as well I want to say the same what this lady said. No, thank you so much, because maybe 2-3 times you, Mr. Simka, maybe once mentioned the word Nazis. I would say to any historian, sorry, I can say, I studied history in Poland, in Krakow. Please, if we are talking about any issue, about World War II, doesn't matter which issue, please, never use the word Nazis. Never. Why? Because during World War II, they were not Nazis. They were Germans. For example, in occupied Warsaw, Krakow, whatever, they were branches Nur für Deutsche, not nur für Nazis. Nur für Deutsche. Cinemas, nur für Deutsche, not nur für Nazis. If we are talking about Nazis, we are talking, for example, someone who's got very little knowledge about history will ask, my mother, my father, who was the Nazis? And what you will tell him? Nazis was the person from the Mars? No. They had nationality. I cannot say, sorry, the modern, what the gentleman said, we cannot blame the Germans' modern society. We have to blame their fathers, grandfathers, what the majority Germans during World War II, not everyone, but majority of them, they were killers. It's true. They were murderers and killers. And we have to say about, we are talking about Holocaust. Main question which everyone has to answer, especially German nations, has to answer. Why? Why?
This,
until
this,
end of the World War II, even when everyone knows that Germany is losing this war, why Hitler had support of 80, I would say 90% of German society support Hitler until even March 1945. Thank you.
All right. Any last words from any of our distinguished speakers?
I would concur with that, and that's something I've sort of been brought to. It's been brought to my attention by my contact with Poles over the last few years that it's something that I know Poles are very sensitive about, and I think rightly so. I don't share the fear that sort of goes along with that, or that it's almost like a conspiracy theory that, you know, it's a conspiracy to make the world forget who the Nazis were. I honestly don't see that. I can see the concern and I share it. And actually in my writing, if I talk about Nazi policy or if I talk about, you know, the Nazi government, then that's a specific use of the word Nazi. But if I talk about German forces, then I use the word German. So I'm absolutely alive to it. But that idea that it's somehow a conspiracy that Germany's sort of backing away from its history, I don't see. I honestly don't see. Because Germany itself is exemplary in confronting its own history, particularly this episode, in showing that to the world and being brutally honest about it, particularly with the Holocaust. I mean, there are still black spots. I know there's a black spot, particularly with the occupation of Poland and the whole relationship with Poland in the war. That's one that's still difficult and needs to be addressed. But Germany is exemplary, really, in its treatment of its history. And look at the comparison. Look at the comparison to Japan, to Russia, in terms of history policy. So I think I agree. I share some of those concerns, but let's give Germany its credit where it's due.
Thank you. And the last word goes to Mr. Nowak, who is a director and an expert in the Polish Foreign Ministry on Polish-Jewish relations.
Yeah, I have just one question to you. I mean, you're talking about Germany. This is like a good example of how to talk about their own history. But what do you think about the Stauffenberg? I mean, they present the history of the conspiracy against Hitler as something that was anti-Nazi. I don't think that there is any reason to believe in that. They wanted to save Germany, Nazi Germany. They didn't want to, oppose the policy that the state was pursuing.
I think we will have to end it at this because we wanted to finish at 8 p.m. and I think this would begin another fascinating discussion, which I hope that we will have. So can we first congratulate our wonderful panelists? thank you very much. I think we will still have about 20 minutes around here to take some photos, continue some discussions if anybody wishes. But may I wholeheartedly thank you to the organizers of today's evening, which is first and foremost the Hatikva Foundation with Jarosław Papis sitting here in the front. Thank you so much. Thank you to British Poles, especially my mother, Maria Byczynski, sitting here in the second row. And Mariusz Woźniak. Without him, nothing would be possible. And this event has been supported by the Polish Prime Minister's Chancellery of a special fund to promote Polonia abroad. So thank you so much. Tomorrow we have another important day, the theatre show that you are wholeheartedly invited. If you have not been invited, please speak to Mariusz Woźniak. Perhaps there are some tickets left. So thank you so much for this important step in promoting not just the Ładoś group, but also the Polish-Jewish relations. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.